Hello, friends. Welcome to the Note Coach podcast. I'm your host, Suzanne Kohlberg, joined today by Nate Pope. As I say, I remembered your surname. You don't have it in front of you. Usually I have it written down, but So today I pronounced it right because for my listeners, Nate, I usually get the surname pronounced wrong. But I just didn't remember what it was. So I didn't remember something, and we're going to talk about like brain health today and stuff. So this is interesting. So I haven't had anybody on the show talk about TBI, so traumatic brain injury, concussion recovery, all those sorts of things. So I'm really, really looking forward to this conversation. Where would you like to start?
Well, sure. I think a great place to start would be, the need for understanding this better. Just understanding how many of us have hit our head and how many of us know someone who have hit their head, had a concussion, and symptoms linger and just don't always get better. We hear people say, oh yeah, so and so hit their head and they just haven't quite been the same since. Or there's a lot of people who they call it the invisible injury sometimes because they've hit their head and now they have headaches, but they can otherwise do everything that they can do, but they also have a little brain fog maybe, and maybe their memory isn't quite as good, and they're more sensitive to light or noise, or they might have some blurry vision from time to time and balance issues, dizziness. Like the list goes on because your brain is involved in everything. And so many people are suffering with what's called post-concussion syndrome, and that's where you have lingering symptoms after you've hit your head, and it's been post 1 month since
Okay.
that time. And there's just millions of people wandering around with slightly less quality in their life because they have symptoms that just are not going away and they're completely fixable. So that's our passion and what we get the most joy out of here at our clinic. It's NCX Brain Recovery is the name of our clinic. Is seeing patients come in with a myriad of symptoms and knowing that they actually have totally healthy brains. Most of them have had an MRI that says you're totally fine. So they have a healthy brain tissue wise, but it's just not doing its job right. And all of that is thankfully is now fixable, but it requires more of an intense approach rather than the traditional, 1 hour here and there kind of approach, like what we do with the rest of the body. We do many hours in a row, many days in a row of intense focus therapy, and the brain responds really well to that. And most of our patients have full recoveries, and within 2 weeks have 75% less symptoms that they report. And this is even if they've had symptoms for years since they hit their head. So it's exciting. There's a lot of implications since that time that this can help a lot of other people. And so we could also talk about that because there's a lot of other brain related things out there that do not have an intense approach that's available to them. And so they're sitting in chairs, counseling. Don't get me wrong, that's valuable in its own right. Or they're getting prescribed medications. And so they're getting diagnosed and prescribed, and they're sitting and talking for a lot of this. And really, what the brain needs to recover is it needs a whole brain approach, and it needs many hours in a row, many days in a row to really target those areas that have gone less active and just need to become more active again because they're forcing other areas to overwork and compensate, which is cool that our brain can do that, but it's not a great long-term option because those areas are not designed to do that. So,
I'm just
uh,
thinking, so I've got a story. So
yeah.
my daughter is in primary school. So a couple of years ago, she was either in grade 3 or 4. She's in grade 6 now.
Mhm.
I go to pick her up. It's Friday afternoon. The bell's ringing. I'm waiting there. The kids are coming out. The kids are coming out. The kids are coming out. I'm like, where's my kid? She's usually the first one. Waiting, 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 waiting. It's like the trickle is down the line, and like there's like not many kids. So I'm just thinking I better go into the office. Actually, she would have been in grade 3 because it was still the tail end of COVID and the parents weren't allowed in the school ground. The
Mm.
school had forbidden parents to go into the ground. So I'm
Yes.
just about to phone the office to say, hey, like, where's my kid? When my phone rings and it's the office, and they're like, oh, Mrs. Colberg, we have Xanthi in sick bay. Can you come in? I was like, yeah, sure. Anyway, I go into sick bay. Here's my kid holding her head, bawling her
Mm.
eyes out. And I was like, what happened? And they're like, we don't know. I said, Sandy, what happened? She's like, I don't know. She had no idea. She's holding her head. She's just saying her
Mhm.
head hurts and she's crying. And I was like, well, I better take her straight to the doctor. Anyway, as we're going there, I'm asking her all these questions. She had no memory of what happened. And I said, did
Mhm.
somebody hit you in the head? Because I'm thinking Friday afternoon, chairs up, end of the day. Like when I went to school, that's what we used to do. She had no memory. So I took her to the doctors. The doctor's asking her all the screening questions and everything. And we couldn't figure out what had happened. And I had to watch her for it. They're like, we think she has a concussion, all this sort of stuff. But anyway, what was funny, in hindsight, she gets to school Monday. This kid comes rushing over to her. I'm so sorry I hit you with a chair. So I was right. Like when she put the chair up at the end of the day, she'd whacked my daughter in the head. She's got no
Yes.
recollection of it. So like
Yes.
that's what fascinated me. And they're like, does she have double vision? Has she vomited? Anything? None of those things. But I don't know. She's kind of vague. So I'm like, when you were talking about like these things can happen for years, my question is like, how do you know? I guess you do assessments and stuff, but especially if it's a young person, are they just a vague type person in general, or could this potentially be something from that happened many years ago? Obviously, I'm not asking you
Um,
to diagnose on a podcast, don't stress, but I'm just curious about like when you have people come to see you. Because like when I think traumatic brain injury, I think like somebody who dived into a swimming pool and it wasn't deep enough, or somebody who hit themselves on a branch, like a big thing, not somebody who got whacked in the head with a chair on a Friday afternoon.
Oh yeah. No, we see all sorts of little concussions. It's interesting what can affect someone. Now children are pretty resilient. The chances are she bounced back and her brain is completely fine. But if the questions that you would ask if you wanted to know are more specific to post-concussion syndrome symptoms. We have a list of about 40 symptoms that are typical, and we ask a severity level of a 0 to 6. Where would you rate the symptoms? 0 being nothing, and 6 is pretty extreme. And we just go through all of those symptoms. And what happens is the child and the parent are like, oh, we haven't thought about that. What do you think about? And if they really think about it, sometimes they're like, yeah, school got a lot harder, like at that time. And I used to like reading, or I was at least okay with it, but now I don't like reading. And we talk about blurry vision. Sometimes they're like, oh, well, it's not really blurry. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. And we start discovering things that parents didn't realize. The child is not, um, self-aware enough at that age, to figure this out. And so, just through talking, we do free consultations here, and I often will have parents that are worried come in, and it's always nice to be able to just reassure them and say, good job being a good parent. You came in, you're worried, going through all this stuff. It looks like they completely reset. Their brain is fine. There's no lingering symptoms here that I can see. There's other times where they're really grateful they came in because they do have a handful of things that are different and are markedly different sometimes. And they're like, yeah, I think it was about that time when they started complaining of headaches, and we just never, put
Put
the
two and
two
two together.
together.
But that's the fascination about
Yeah,
having this conversation with you, because there's a friend of
yeah.
mine. I don't know if there was a head injury involved, but basically her daughter was struggling at school and she did all
Hmm.
the official tests. They did the MRIs, they did CTs, they couldn't find anything. They took her through all the dyslexia tests and whatever. And I can't remember the ins and outs of it, but basically she if something was auditory, like if somebody asked her something, she could do it. But she really struggled to read. But she wasn't dyslexic. And as an offhand comment, she said to her mother something or other about how the words move. So they're not like back to front, but like when she looks at the page, the things move around. And I think sometimes if you don't know the exact question to ask, how you can slip through a lot of these major screening things. And she was like, what do you mean the words move? Like, they're not supposed to do that.
Hmm.
But if you've always
Yeah.
had that, you don't know another way. Like when I was a child, for whatever reason, my parents never got my eyes tested. And anyway, I think I started complaining about headaches, and I was in year 10, so I was like 15 at the time. Finally got my eyes tested. They were like, oh, honey, you need glasses. And I got these glasses, and I remember walking out of the optometrist with my glasses on, and I was like, oh, the trees have leaves. And everyone's laughing at me.
Yeah.
It's like, but if you don't know, like if you've adapted in, like I didn't have a brain injury, I just had a problem with my vision. But if you've adapted
Yep.
to this way of being, and as you said, like you just kind of, oh, this is my normal headache. Like I remember I had back pain. I've had chronic back pain for a long time. And then I had an injury, and I saw a chiropractor, and I had a couple of adjustments. They're like, how do you feel now? I'm like, oh, I'm just back to my normal pain. And they just burst out laughing. It's like, do you hear what you just said? And I was like, yeah, like my normal baseline pain. They're like, it's not normal to be in pain, but you don't think if this is the way that you have come to be. So that's why I'm curious with the work you do, how sometimes something that happened a long time ago or something that you've just kind of adapted to, you could realize actually there is a way through this, and that could be something, as you said, something you work at. It's not magic, but I think, you know, if you're in traditional therapies, and they have their place, but sometimes something else, someone's question can be unlocking.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's funny. When I have contacts now, but when I first got glasses as a kid, I had the exact same. There's leaves on the tree experience, and there's trees on the mountain, and those kinds of things. But I thought at that time it would be cool to be an eye doctor. And now I get to experience that with all sorts of symptoms because patients come in and they have satiated, if you will, to their experiences. They've gotten used to just this is the new norm, and they don't even realize that they've lost clarity. They're in a constant brain fog, maybe, and their mental fatigue is significant, and physical fatigue, and their sleep patterns, and there's so many things that can be off. And when they start resetting and those symptoms start going away, it's just fun to be a part of because it's like there's leaves on the tree again. It's kind of that experience with whatever symptom it is. Like, I didn't know what it was like. I forgot what it was like to not have a headache or to, be able to remember things or see clearly again. And so it's a fun environment to work in. So
And is there a like a average age, or is it across the board? Because I'm just trying to think, like my dad, if you're listening to this, shout out to your dad. I don't think he listens to my show, but knowing my luck, the time I mentioned him, he would be. Um, he's getting older, and he's had all the tests and the, you know, the dementia screening tests and stuff, but he's like quite forgetful, and it's bothering him a lot. And all the
Mhm.
doctors are like, well, you're passing all the tests, like you're just getting older. Like it's so hard sometimes to just be dismissed. It's like, this is bothering me. Oh no, it's just it's just, you just got to deal with this now. And sometimes when you come across, you know, some sort of modality or something like you're doing, or, you know, you get your glasses and you're like, oh wow. So to keep persisting, if something, you know, if you have persistent brain fog or forgetfulness or something, instead of just being like, oh well, I'm just getting older, like I move on with my life and I have to deal with it, to be like, actually, maybe there is more to this or something else that I could pursue. I find that, you know, so do you have a general age that you work with, or is it across the board?
It's pretty across the board. Our program's intense enough. We are about 10 years old and older. Most of our patients are probably, between high school and 75, 80 years old. But it's a pretty broad range. We're pretty comfortable adapting to the age ranges. And yeah, a lot of people are coming because they're wondering, am I just getting old? Um, we do have some in that category, like your dad, and experiencing some, memory loss, and it's easy to write it off as old age. But the reality is, an old brain is still very capable of doing quite a bit. You'll meet some pretty sharp older individuals, and were they just lucky? And usually no, it's their lifestyle choices are brain challenging kinds of lifestyle choices they've made, and it keeps their brain sharpened. And there's things that we can do if we feel like, we tend to do what we like to do. And as we get older, we get in such patterns, and our brain can start uh, underperforming in certain areas because we don't use those areas as often or challenge those areas as often as we should. We should always be learning something new and trying to get better at something we love. And if you do those two things, that can really offset some of that. But yeah, we love working with some of the older populations. A lot of them that we work with have had strokes. That's one of our biggest populations. If you have a minor stroke, especially, uh, most of our program is physically demanding somewhat. You're on your feet, being challenged with your balance and body movement while you're talking and engaging in conversations, while your vision is having to track like a ball that we're throwing at you or something. When you work multiple major processing areas of the brain at the same time, those areas have to work together, and none of them can cheat for the other because they're having to integrate and work together. And that's what fixes a lot of the balance problems we get with some of our mental health, especially concussion stuff. So
That's fascinating. So, what like daily habits do you recommend for people to maintain brain health, even if they don't have injuries? Because, like, my dad was basically told, like, just go do crosswords and stuff. But what else could people do? Because, as you said, like, are people just lucky? And I'm thinking of my husband's grandmother. She passed away last year at 96. She was whip, like, with it right to the end, like, just never lost any faculties, was like a mean card player. And it was fascinating. But then other people at a lot younger age, and obviously there is genetics and all this sort of stuff, but I'm just curious about, what you recommend for people to maintain brain health regardless of whether they've had an injury or not.
sure. Sure. Yeah, no, that's an awesome question. So if you can walk on uneven terrain, and even if it's not uneven terrain, if you can walk where you're having to step on and off of sidewalks, and maybe you go in the park and it's on grass, which is definitely more uneven than the sidewalk or the road, and you can observe visually your surroundings. You're kind of like a detective on a walk. You're kind of trying to take in your environment, what you see, what you hear. And a lot of older people enjoy going for walks, and what they should do instead of going tunnel vision, they should be kind of social. If you can go with someone, it's even better because then you're talking, you're listening, you're walking on uneven terrain, you're visually looking at the dog and the trees and the mountains or wherever you're at, you're noticing your surroundings. um, that's a pretty simple daily thing someone could do as they get older to really keep their brain working in a lot of really healthy ways, because our brain is meant to use those areas at the same time, like balance and body movement. When you're on uneven terrain, your brain can't go on autopilot like it can on flat ground. It has to be pretty aware of where to put your feet so you don't sprain an ankle or trip on, this or that. And so it's a very much more brain involved kind of walking when it's uneven ground. And if you're not just looking straight ahead, but you're looking at the trees and the birds and the dogs and the people, you are now walking straight but looking sideways. And there's a lot of process our brain has to really put together, how to balance. Our vestibular balance center and our visual motor centers have to integrate. And those are really good things to keep working well together. And then if you can talk and listen to someone as they talk, like a conversation, if you don't have someone to go with and, a podcast or an
Shameless
audiobook.
plug, you can listen to all 400 and something episodes of this podcast.
Yeah. It really is better than music, though, at that point, because you have to kind of listen. Music you can kind of tune in and out of. And so I tell people, if you love music, that's great. That's more of a brain break, though, than a brain challenge. And so go on your walk, listen to your music as you go, or maybe to your podcast and challenge, and then do the walk back as more of a brain break and listen to your music. But those
Funny
are
you should
some
say
great
that.
habits.
When I drive, I listen to music. And I love how you say brain break because I need to concentrate on the traffic. Like,
Mhm.
where's this
Mhm.
person doing? What are they doing? What are they, you know? So music, because I can tune in and out and I can sing or not sing, depending. But my husband always listens to podcasts. I can't. I was like, I can't take in that
Mhm.
and safely navigate. I live in Sydney. Like we are 1 hour from the Harbour Bridge or 3, depending on traffic. If it's a slow,
Yes.
but when I'm walking, I always listen to podcasts and I like to pause and then go back and then stop and then use notes on my phone and keep walking. But it's funny you should say that. So we're recording this coming up to Halloween. So all the houses in my neighborhood are all decked out. And this morning I was walking my son to school and the path is quite uneven and he has a scooter, so I'm making sure he doesn't like face plant, and I'm like, oh, look at that house. And then having the conversations like, we've got to come back here later in the week when it's, so it's just kind of like the thing, as you said, and then the terrain, like, is this uneven or there's a step there, and then also too what you just start to remember, because we're coming along and we get to the end of this lane, I'm like, that dog hasn't, and just as I say that, because there's one dog that every day scares the life out of me because I'm just not prepared and it throws itself against the lane, like take me for a walk thing, and just as I said it, like I was like, I haven't heard, and there it was. But it's funny how many pieces of information you can hold
Yes.
simultaneously. Anything else
Yeah.
besides, like, and I also too, walking's just good for health all around. Like it's also good
Yeah.
for your
Yeah.
cardiovascular health. So,
Yes. Yeah.
um,
Cardio is actually one of the big things, because you will get blood, fresh blood to the brain, which brings fresh oxygen. And a lot of the neurochemical things we want to have happen in our brain to maintain what we have and to build neural pathways is oxygen. So we need that. And you get that most naturally by doing cardio regularly. So, yeah. But there
any,
are other things. Yeah.
yep. Any other, just one other one you can recommend?
Yeah. So, well, when you mentioned the crossword puzzle, it kind of made me smile because when you're doing a crossword puzzle, and it's great, and any brain, game or anything like that, it's great. But if you're just sitting in a chair and you're not talking or engaging with another person, then you're just working a pretty limited part of your brain to solve that problem. And it's still good, but it would be better if maybe you were doing it while you were standing up, or if you were um, talking with someone else while you're doing a puzzle. Maybe that social piece, if you can integrate the social with the challenge and the problem solving, then those puzzles are even better because you don't, one thing you want to avoid is isolating yourself into, you know, crossword land or, whatever puzzle you get or Sudoku or whatever it is.
Because your brain will
You,
get good at that feature. It's like when you go to the gym, if you work out and work out the same muscles, the same reps,
yeah,
and it's like, why am I not getting the gains? It's like, because you're
yes,
not putting your body under eustress, like good stress, not distress.
yes,
But if
yes.
you go to the gym when you're new, anything will change because you haven't been going, but you get into the routine. So I like your point. If you just like, I do the daily Sudoku, and but also bringing someone else into it. So my daughter and I, every day we do the Wordle, as in she gets her iPad, I get my
Mhm.
phone, we're like ready, set,
Yes.
go to see who can get it the first. And then we found co-wordle. I don't know if you've seen that, but you can either take turns, as in she gets a guess and I get a guess, and it comes up on each of
Oh,
our screens, or you just kind of compete. And she's 11 and she whips me more times than I can count. So,
oh,
but
I
it
love
kind of
that.
brings the
That's
gamification, fun, interact. We're not walking. We could probably walk and do it, but somebody would fall over. But the other question I was going to ask, this is totally unrelated, and you might not have the answer for this, but I've always been curious. Do you know anything, or is there any reasoning behind? I suppose I could just Google this, but someone who talks brains, how come someone asked me something I did last week, like, oh, this person you interviewed on the podcast, and I'll be like, who? But I can remember lyrics verbatim for the songs that were popular when I was like a teenager. Like, how does that happen? You can't remember what you ate for breakfast, but you can remember something from like 3 decades ago.
yeah, everyone is unique that way. Some remember names, some remember faces, some remember bits of trivial information. Others hold on to the only that which is pertinent or important to them, and they forget all the trivial stuff. Like they, when we go to the grocery store, for example, we can basically tell our brain, I don't need to remember this after I buy it. And we've pretty much given our brain permission to dump that information. Yeah. So I don't know if you are a Harry Potter fan, but it's kind of like the
Yes.
pensive, you know, and
Yes.
when Dumbledore's putting memories in the pensive. But we kind of do that when we have pieces of information. Think about school when we were learning something that we said to ourselves, I'll never need this to know this in my life, except for the test that's coming up. So what do? We tell our brain, you got to hold on to it until
Until
you
tomorrow.
take the test, and then we dump it. But our brain is kind of capable of prioritizing what it holds on to and what it doesn't. The mystery is when it holds on to things that you're just like, why did I remember that? You know, and usually it's probably connected to some memory links. You know, we can link information if we learned it in kind of a multi-sensory way, like maybe there was, especially if there's emotion involved, emotional memory is the strongest because there's neurochemicals that make those memories so much stronger. If you think of your happiest moments or your most fearful moments or your saddest moments in life, you hold on to those memories way better than others. And so, but some of there is random stuff still that pops up, and who knows why you remember some of that. But
But it's interesting at that point. I have no memory for names. Like I can meet
mhm.
you and 5 minutes later have forgotten your name. So I try the mnemonics and whatever, but I never forget faces. If I'm watching a movie or a TV show with someone, they'll literally have to say to me beforehand, don't start telling me that they were on like the OC or Dawson's Creek or whatever. Like it's just really irritating. And then they'll argue. I'll be like, no, they were on this. No, they weren't. And then we'll go to IMDb and I'm like, you were right. I was like, yeah, I never forget a face, but a name, no.
Yep, yep,
Gone. So,
that's how it is.
or a little bit, or I have also one of those memories for like random facts. Like if you have trivia night, take me, I'll be on your team. I remember once they were like, what's the little thing on the end of a shoelace called? And I was like, oh, an adlet. It's like I was the only person in the whole room. Like, how did you know that? And I was like, random bits of useless information. I'm your person. But yeah, when you're
Yeah.
talking about studying, I remember being at university and I'd literally be like the compulsory data dump. Be walking out of that exam room, I'd be like, I'm never going to need this again. And in lockdown, where we had to like homeschool, I remember trying to teach my son about rhomboids. And he's like, what do I need to know this for? I'm like, so one day when you're a parent, you have to explain this to your own kids. Like, that's the only reason you need to know.
That's
Oh, I
great.
love that.
That's great.
So, if people are listening to this and they have maybe had a head injury or something in the past, and they might be like, oh, well, I've had headaches ever since. Because sometimes too, you don't track it back. I think that's the point that's really stood out for me until somebody mentions, I I had some test thing done once, and the therapist I saw like they were doing they looking at blood under the microscope, and they literally could tell me, like, this is a bit too much information, but I was overshare. They could tell me when I went off the pill. They were like, from a drop of blood, they could see because of what
Mhm.
it does to your cells and stuff. So the
Yeah,
question I'm asking in a long-winded way is, if someone's like, they've just gotten used to it, headaches, forgetfulness, or whatever, and I know you said you do like consults online and stuff. Can they just book that in and you'll go over a question? So like, what is it, the process is what I'm asking.
sure, sure. Yeah, no, we try to make it super easy because they need something really easy a lot of times, and we've also made it free because we'd love to help someone even if they don't come to us, because we know a lot of them will also, and so it's still good for our business, and it's also a service we can provide other people. But a free consultation is a great way to start. So you can just go to ncxbrainrecovery.com,
Perfect. I'll put
ncxbrainrecovery.com.
that in
And
the show notes.
yeah, and then they can just sign up for a free consult. We do them virtually if you don't live close by, and mostly that's what we do is virtual consultations. And we just go through your symptoms, the history of what happened, how long it's been. Um, and in most cases, we can help people because usually hitting your head does not mean damaging your brain. It means that your brain has now, you have a healthy brain not doing its job right. It has a few areas it's underworking, and which means it has to overwork other areas, and you're just in a compensation pattern that is completely fixable for most people. And so we love what we do because of that. But the best place to start is just a free consult. We can help you. And if it's not us, then we can also usually direct people where to go. So
That's
yeah,
wonderful. And one
that's
last
the best.
question before we hit record, you mentioned these tools can be used for things outside of brain injury, like potentially anxiety, depression, maybe I think you said ADHD. I'm curious. So
Mhm.
if people, do they need to have been diagnosed with those things, or what would lead them to come to you, people outside of having a recognized brain incident?
Sure. Well, a lot of people have hit their head and didn't realize that the anxiety they had, or the depression, or the focus, issues, or whatever symptoms they had, they didn't realize um, that those were actually connected to having hit their head. And so that's a possibility. But even if you haven't hit your head, if medications or other therapies have not worked, that's the kinds of people who have asked us to try to help them, that even though they didn't have a head injury, they wanted to try a more intense approach. And so a consult, again, is the best place to start. They can just call and say, hey, we had an 80-year-old woman call us, and actually her daughter called in her behalf and was like, my mom really, she's done the electrical shock stimulation stuff. She's done all the medications. She's done counseling, but she has depression and anxiety, and we just don't know where to go. And she had an amazing recovery through our program. And well, I see her daughter all the time in Costco, actually, and she just gives me a big hug. And it's like, you've changed her life. And it's just, it's super fun. But the ones we have the most success with, if they haven't hit their head and they don't have a previous, head injury, are the ones who have tried a bunch of other things and it just hasn't worked. And sometimes what they need is an intense approach, many hours in a row, many days in a row. Our brains are creatures of habit. To change that, you have to have the repetition. You have to do it many times in a row, many days in a row. And then the brain also likes the path of least resistance. And so we try to use that to our advantage in our therapy, show the brain an easier way, and try to activate the stuff that is supposed to be active, because it's always easier to work the right way than to work the wrong way. And once it realizes, oh, this is more effective, the brain realizes that, and it'll hang on to that, but it'll slip a little bit here and there if you haven't yet created the habit. So you have to satisfy path of least resistance rule and the habit rule. And once you do both of those things, then you usually your progress sticks, and whatever gains you make. The brain doesn't have really a good reason to go back to its old way when it's now recognized this is easier and it's a habit. And so,
The
yeah.
image that comes to mind when I was growing up, our house had a glass sliding door, and
Hmm.
every so often it would come off the rail. It would still open and close, like it would still function. It just didn't function well. And when you got it
Hmm.
back into the groove, like when you got back into realignment, it was just smooth. So I think, if your brain's slightly off kilter, like still doing all the things, but as you said, the path of least resistance, that thing, like just like that little adjustment to get it back in line, and then it will open and close or move more smoothly.
Yes, that's exactly right.
I love it. Thank you so
Yep.
much for joining us, Nate. So I'll put the link to ncxbrainrecovery.com in the show notes. And yeah, I really appreciate. Was there anything else you wanted to say before we wrapped up?
No, no, thanks for having me on. I think
Awesome.
that's
Thank you.
that's
This has
good.
been fascinating. Thank you everyone for listening. I'll catch you on the next one. Bye for now.
Thank you.